I don't think that vault experiments are very good.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I know it may be weird. Vaults are, from the start, a core part of the Fallout setting's identity, and if you've been following along with my channel, you know that I'm a huge fan of Fallout. I don't have an issue with vaults as a location, although exploring multiple in one game can be a little samey. And as a piece of world building, I generally approve of them and their experiments, but the problem is that ever since Chris Avalone's Fallout Bible and the Bethesda acquisition, those experiments have been less and less meaningful and impactful, and more of an excuse for what to cram into the next dungeon. Only with the advent of the TV show did it hit me that what I assumed was the original vision for the Vault experiments is no longer canonical. Did I realize just how terribly wrong things have gotten with vaults? That's not to say that the TV show is to blame for their degradation, though. This started with Fallout 2's troubled production, and since then, I believe that the Vault experiments and associated info have become a net negative for Fallout as a whole.
They were a temporary measure to protect a chosen few from the war and aid them in the subsequent construction of a new world.
In his video, The True Purpose of Vaults in Fallout, Tim Kaine explains that the original vision for the vaults was to test technology necessary for a generational colony ship to get out of the solar system and settle a habitable world. The Enclave, which included vault-tec's director, was under the impression that Earth could not be salvaged after the Great War. This is a decent explanation, but I don't think it's a complete one. Technological experiments are fine, but they don't necessarily make for good storytelling hooks, and they also potentially widen the circle of conspirators a little too far. So, vault-tec's subcontractors, they make water chips and geks, which are then tested rigorously by the vaults, who then survive and go on to rebuild. Their overseers therefore feed information back to the Enclave, where scientists continue to optimize the tech for the colony ship.
You'll die, and so will your family.
It would be infeasible to test things that we know will lead to catastrophic failures, as we see with many vaults, because catastrophic failures on a colony ship mean humanity's extinction. This explanation means that you kind of have to lose the vault where, for example, the water chip intentionally fails, or the vault door can't close all the way. So a lot of the vaults just disappear. And by the way, this technological explanation for the experiments doesn't really work when you consider that the Earth could, in fact, be salvaged. We see that multiple times in Fallout 1, where societies within vaults do emerge and rebuild on the surface. And you can't say necessarily that, oh, they didn't know that they were going to add the Gek to the setting at the time. Actually, the Gek was known about during the development of Fallout 1. It's in the end of the Fallout 1 game manual. The explanation that I grew up with and that most fans are familiar with is from Chris Avalone's Fallout Bible, that the experiments are social experiments made to test the psychological and cultural profiles of people who are to be put on the colony ship. I don't mind this one. It explains at least most of the experiments we see in classic Fallout. In the first two games, there are 5 vaults, 8, 12, 13, 15, and the demo vault at Los Angeles, which I always thought was supposed to be Vault 1, but the Van Buren demo apparently puts Vault 1 somewhere in the Midwest, so like it's Milwaukee or something. The people in those vaults all survived, although not necessarily in the same conditions, and overall the vaults do appear to be structurally sound and largely identical in layout, even though there's damage in 3 of them. There's still some vagueness. Were the Enclave going to take people from the most successful vaults and put them on the colony ship with their own personnel? Or would the Enclave have to socially condition themselves after the data that they gained from surveilling the vaults? Now, it's important to note that the Fallout Bible does not itself mention the colony ship concept, but most fans of my generation picked up some version of that story through behind-the-scenes info on Fallout 2 and the Van Buren's Bloomfield Space Center. Fans knew for years that the Enclave were trying to leave Earth. The spaceship scene in San Francisco that the Hubologists are using was originally designed for the Enclave until the ending of Fallout 2 was changed after Tim Kaine left, and then the Bloomfield Space Center's rocket was intended for a Mars mission. What's worse is that that the Fallout Bible did start the trend of vault experiments that are clearly not social experiments, and many of them are obvious jokes. Looking back at it, Tim Kaine himself did compile this list, and many of them are clearly technological experiments more than social, so they may be holdovers from that earlier development. Unfortunately, even some of the technological ones are bad. For example, Vault 12's door not closing is not something that gives relevant data on building a spaceship for the Enclave. If you open a door on a spaceship while it's in transit, everyone inside is going to die. Carrying this into Fallout 3 and New Vegas, where vaults became an easy way to create a new dungeon, I estimate that of the 12 vaults between those two games, the only ones really relevant to the social experiment in preparation for a colony ship would be Vault 101, which is not supposed to ever open, and Vault 112, whose VR technology is apparently life-extending and thus kind of defeats the purpose of the spaceship being a colony ship, but it's a good way of blending the technological and social experiments because of the impact that the virtual world would have on the inhabitants. I will also give kudos to New Vegas for Vault 11's annual sacrifice experiment. While not an experiment that would be directly imposed on people on a colony ship, it's the kind of dilemma that tests the psychological power of the subjects and would give valuable info for the Enclave when devising the plan to escape Earth. Fallout 4's Vault 111 also dismisses the need for a multi-generational ship with its stable cryotech, and has other vaults in the game that have technological backgrounds or conditions that would just have no bearing on a colony ship. To be fair to Vault 111, I think it's a fair assessment that the vault experiment has to be succeeded by an experiment on the surface to ensure that the colony that the spaceship deposits will be viable for long-term human survival. Fallout 76 starts to take us in this direction with Vault 76's resettlement program and then Vault 79's gold reserves, but I still have a problem with this portrayal. Vault 79's gold-backed bottle cap economy is completely outside of the vault experiment structure and is, frankly, pretty silly just on its face. Vault 76 isn't inherently bad though, but given that vault-tec and the Enclave were supposed to be engaged in experiments, I have an issue with its lack of standardization when compared to the rest of the vaults. Now, when it comes to vaults and mods, there's just way too many for me to even get into in this video. I'll probably have to do dedicated videos when I get to individual mods, but I would generally say that most mods definitely missed the mark with making the experiments anything more than what they are in the original games. And hey, you know, they're mods, they're just taking cue. I'm not expecting them to retcon everything. Now, Fallout 1.5 Resurrection has Vault 16. I think it's a great subversion of vault experiments. We'll definitely talk about that when I do a video on Albuquerque, but I'll leave that to the side for now. I will give Nevada credit. It didn't add any new numbered vaults, but it does some cool stuff with other types of Fallout shelters. Sonora takes a great vault, Vault 27, from the Fallout Bible. Really appreciated to see that one. And then there is Fallout New California. That one probably is the biggest offender in terms of adding vaults with experiments that I consider just completely extraneous. Definitely going to talk about Vault 18 in a dedicated video as well, but just wanted to put that out there because obviously I bring up mods and Van Buren all the time. People would ask in the comments. I wasn't really going to go into any of those vaults here today. This is all Bethesda, Interplay, Black Isle, Obsidian vaults.
We could check the vault computers. They would probably have the information you seek.
At last, that point about standardization brings us to Vault City, the end result of Vault 8. We can assume that Vault City basically represents the intended success of Project Safehouse. By using the GEC, they established a colony on the surface of an otherwise uninhabitable land. Vault 8 is listed in the Fallout Bible as a control vault. That's helpful. It tells us that the experiments should be standardized so that they can be compared against the results of control groups. But there's a couple of problems. First, there is less and less standardization with each new vault we meet. I know that I criticized vaults earlier for being copy and paste dungeons in the 3D games, but you start to hurt the conceit of the experiment when you inject that variety needed for the layouts, which means that from both a game design and storytelling point of view, it's a lose-lose battle for Fallout writers. I could at least concede that the non-standardization works if they were technological experiments, But then I would circle back to my objections that if the experiment is too plausible, it becomes negligible in telling an exciting story, and if it becomes too outlandish, it will obviously result in mass death and is thus useless. Many vaults lack the equipment to fully execute their experiments. GECs are supposed to be standard equipment per Vault 8's computer in Fallout 2, but the evidence of their use is lacking. For example, in Fallout 4, Vault 81 is active and connected to the surface, but has no community above ground that they built using a GEC. Vault 76, similarly, has no sign of a GEC despite opening and resettling the land of West Virginia. Did Mr. House confiscate Vault 21's GECs when he gambled for the vault? Sometimes it does make sense. Vault 101 isn't intended to open up, so they probably don't have a GEC or other equipment necessary for recolonizing the surface. And Vault 12s might have been damaged by the radiation when the inhabitants were ghoulified. In my opinion, however, to execute the experiment fully, there must be a plan to live on the surface. To this day, Vault 8 is the only example where I can say for certain it's a control vault. It was intended to open after 10 years. Instead, it took 14. That's not bad. The data is probably still useful for the experiment. A thriving community of fragile slaving narcs now exists to blight northern Nevada. I've heard fans mistakenly call Vaults 101 and 76 control vaults, but I don't think this is the case. At least with 101, we know its mission was not standard at all. I know that Vault 3 is supposed to be a control vault, but it opened much later. Shouldn't the opening time be standardized between these vaults? The problem with this control vault stuff is that the Fallout Bible contradicts Fallout 2 itself, wherein President Richardson calls Vault 13 a control group to be opened when needed by the Enclave. The Fallout Bible contradicts this description, but of course, those who have been following along already know that the Fallout Bible exists chiefly to retcon the Fallout setting in preparation for the canceled Fallout 3, so that explains it. Really, we should see more Vault cities, both successes and failures, throughout the series. Many vaults should have already made it to the surface, only for their projects to have fizzled out, leaving behind another layer of ruins in the wasteland. Others should have survived or had partial successes, like Shady Sands. That doesn't mean I want more copy-pasted dungeons. I actually think that adding a surface layer would inject a lot of variety on top of a copy-pasted vault dungeon, because everyone will have to lay out a city differently depending on the circumstances, climate, and environment of where their vault was built. Instead, it seems like that, as with tribes, the concept of vault cities has been lost or rejected in newer entries in the Fallout series. Why don't the dwellers of Vault 76 take their GEC over to Morgantown and simply rebuild it? Ignoring that Fallout 76 is an MMO, of course.
There's a lot of earning potential with the end of the world.
Okay, so I already know that people are going to bring this up, so let's just get it out of the way. The TV show has apparently dismissed experiments as having any scientific value. Now they're a marketing ploy for vault-tec's shareholders to get excited about, which leads to them pitching vault experiments in some kind of Legion of Doom boardroom meeting. What's more is that it seems like some version of the vault experiment is a public affair now. We see an ad in the show for Vault 4's science experiments, so the differentiation between vaults is at least known a little bit by the public. But I imagine that some vaults couldn't have been publicly advertising their experiments. I mean, Vault 12 would probably not sell so many tickets if the radiation shielding door not closing was supposed to be a selling point. But what I find most hacky about the TV show's portrayal is that under no circumstances does it enhance the setting to eject the vault experiment's value and replace it with a very poor critique of capitalism, where boardroom members talk about how they're gonna use nuclear bombs to eliminate their competition. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that the Fallout TV show is made by two companies who would love it if your ability to critique capitalism was reduced to a level lower than a fifth grader. That's what we call controlled opposition. And by that, I mean you are the controlled opposition if you're buying into this explanation. As of Season 2, the new shocking revelation is that the surface is the real experiment, and not the vaults. I don't know what that means. I don't really care to speculate on what that means. They nuked a successful vault city in the show. too. And actually, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if Shady Sands is still coming from Vault 15, because now it's in LA, so did Vault 15 also move to LA? If it did, it means that the master was losing his ability to track even more vaults. I mean, this guy's now like the worst vault finder in the world. It's just kind of ridiculous. It starts to make your head hurt when you think about it.
Do you take me for a fool? If anyone would know these were fakes, it would be me. Who gave you these papers?
My final issue with vault experiments is that their whole existence is predicated on what I like to call Rogue One syndrome. As Tim Kaine recounts, vault experiments were devised in part to solve a plot hole that, with the optimistic figure of 1,000 vaults holding 1,000 people, the United States still could not save all or even most Americans in the event of nuclear war. By introducing this element into the series, we are led to believe that the vaults are both more realistic and factor into the authoritarian backsliding of the Fallout world's United States. Fans often repeat this history as if the United States could or would make an effort in our world to save all Americans if nuclear war happened. The thing is, this isn't a plot hole. Tim points out in his video that if you go back and look at reports from United States agencies and think tanks, the government has always known that the situation looked very bleak for thermonuclear war. War between the US and the Soviet Union would probably have resulted in the death of tens of millions of Americans, and that doesn't even begin to get into what would happen to everybody else. Furthermore, the idea that vault-tec was the only firm capable of building fallout shelters is pretty fishy. Being a government contractor, vault-tec likely competed with other firms to secure the contract for Project Safehouse, as real defense contractors compete to secure contracts for manufacturing arms, or planes, or other weapons of war. Those companies don't just go away after losing that contract. They likely sell to the government in smaller capacities, possibly to build military or government bunkers, or they sell to businesses, schools, and private citizens to build even smaller shelters. This is yet another masterful thing that Fallout Nevada did by introducing the swimming pool turned fallout shelter building company Praiser Inc. in Salt Lake City. But we'll have to discuss them another time. You don't have to look far to find fallout shelters in the real-world United States for government officials, military assets, and civilians. Raven Rock, Greenbrier, Peanut Island are all real places. For civilians, many people still have fallout shelters under their houses and elementary schools. They are many, and all built by different contractors. It should not be dismissed that this would happen in Fallout 2. The alternate argument that vault-tec is really the only corporation able or authorized to build such shelters paints a picture that would probably run counter to many people's assumptions about the hyper-corporatist pre-war United States, and is probably not a compatible view with the direction that Bethesda and Amazon intend to take the series in, but I have always had a lingering feeling that the United States or vault-tec might not be as dedicated to free enterprise as fans tend to believe. But we'll have to save that for another video. And by the way, I'm not saying that the United States would never unethically or illegally experiment on its civilians. Obviously, things like the Tuskegee trials, the Puerto Rico birth control trials, MK Ultra, these are all very real things. I could totally see scenarios where experiments inside of vaults are happening. I just don't think there's really good, strong justification. And believe me, when we get to like talking about new plague, the blue flu, we'll have a lot more to say on these topics.
But what proof do you have that your ancestor was from a vault?
If you asked me what I would do if Fallout got a hard reboot, I would tell you to go away. After that, I would say that the vault problem is pretty close to the top of my mind. I'd like a dedicated vault Bible or design document that outlines exactly what vaults are, what their standard configuration and equipment is, and if we assume that experiments remain part of the setting, I would probably go with Tim Kaine's model, with the experiment being a minor part of the vault background that feeds into other organizations' goals, instead of an increasingly big question every time we see a new vault. Because right now, I feel like the experiment has come to precede the vault. When a new vault is added to Fallout 76 or shows up in the TV show, fan discourse is all about speculating on what the experiment is all about for this new vault. Personally, I just can't bring myself to care. I mean, I could sit here for about an hour going through the various vaults in Fallout games and just pointing out the lack of any kind of scientific rigor. And I don't really think it's like a funny part of the setting how scientists are so quirky, they don't even know how experiments work. I think that's just silly, and I think it's an excuse. In fact, I'll talk about that in a future video, I'm sure, about Fallout's humor or degradation thereof. But anyway, I don't know if there's really a way to salvage the experiment lore as it stands right now, but personally I just hope that future Fallout titles move away from vaults entirely. We're pretty late into the timeline. We're more than 200 years after the nuclear war. It's probable that most, if not all, vaults have opened and either repopulated the surface or they were just destroyed. It's not a well we need to keep going back to. If anything, I'd like to see what new societies on the surface could do with the existing vaults. Mutants Rising's take on the city that the NCR builds atop Vault 15 looks really cool. Let's see more of that and leave the messy dungeons behind.
What happens to the vault if we lose the best of a generation? What if we are the only safe place in the world? You just gave us back all these lives. I can't take the chance of losing them. I've made a lot of tough decisions since I took this position, but none of them harder than this one.
And finally, I will encourage everyone to go play Iron Tower Studios' Colony Ship. It is a new Fallout-like game from them, came out in 2023. It is once again an exploration of this generational colony ship concept, and it's kind of funny. It's almost like how you could imagine how Fallout 3 would have looked if Tim Kaine were back in charge. It's kind of interesting because, you know, he was only at the start of Fallout 2, then he left mid-development. We have Van Buren, which is Interplay without Tim Kaine trying to do Fallout 3, and then we have Bethesda's take. I think that Colony Ship is a good representation of where Tim was going, or at least I think it is, although he doesn't like sequels, so maybe not. Maybe I'm completely off the chain there. Anyway, Colony Ship is a great game, definitely great if you're a Fallout fan. Check it out. Thank you.